In lessons 1 and 2, you've seen how we can use Gimp to enhance or to restore old photos, but Gimp is also basically a painting tool, and in this lesson we'll explore how we can create images from scratch. We'll start by creating a new image, File, New, and this leads us to the Create a New Image dialog box. It remembers the last image size that was used, but just as a review, if you click on Template, you can see that there's a large variety of templates available to start from. In this case, we're using the 1920 by 1080 full display option. And now that appears there. You'll also notice there's an advanced options here where you can go in and change things like the X and Y resolution and other properties of the image. We're going to go ahead and accept the default settings for a 1920 by 1080 image and then say OK. And now we have a new canvas on the screen. Now, because of the fact that I'm recording this on a 1920 by 1080, and part of that display is reserved for all of these tools, the canvas doesn't fit in this little viewing window. I'm going to press the minus key and zoom out, and now you can see the actual extents of the canvas, and then I'll press plus to zoom in. So you can use plus and minus to zoom in and out. If I go to View, Zoom, you'll see that there are a number of different zoom options. And once again, zoom out with the minus key, zoom in with the plus key, or I can use these quick key options to zoom to different amounts. Let's just try a couple. If I press 5, I'm zooming way in. What you see here is the ghost of this brush that's selected. Well, that's way too big, so I'm going to press the quick key 1 and zoom back to 100%. Then I'm going to press minus a couple of times and arrange the canvas display so that it fits in the window available with my 1920 by 1080 display. Don't be confused. My display on my computer is 1920 by 1080, and this canvas size is actually 1920 by 1080, and we can zoom in and out on the canvas. If you look on the title bar, you'll see that we're using an untitled image and that the resolution is 1920 by 1080. By the way, remember the rule of thumb? The rule of thumb says as soon as you start a new image, you should name it. So I'm going to say File, Save As. In the dialog box, it remembers the last file name I've used, and it remembers the folder that I used. You should go in and create a folder for your practice images, and then enter a new name. So the name for this will be Draw 1. And then I'll just enter that name, or click Save in the dialog box. Now you can see that I'm working on an image whose name is Draw 1. Selecting the paintbrush tool, and when I do that, you'll see all of the options for the paintbrush tool. First thing we can do is we'll select the brush. And notice when you do that, we get this collection of brushes, and that collection of brushes is repeated over here on the brush panel. So you get to choose whether you want to select brushes from the brush panel or from the pop-out brush panel that appears here. Select this one. It says it's hardness 1, or if I select that one, it's chalk, etc. So we have all these brushes to pick from. I'm just going to start a smaller size pencil brush to see how this works. Once I've selected the brush, that particular brush has these characteristics, and to draw, I'll put the cursor someplace and left click, and then I'll drag to draw out a line. If you want to draw a horizontal or a vertical line, you click your starting point and hold the shift key down, and now you'll be limited to straight lines. Or you can click and create an angled straight line. Now notice the color of these lines came out black, and that's because the brush uses the foreground color, and the current foreground color is black. We can change foreground and background color here, and remember that we can switch the foreground and background color. Now if I draw with white on a white canvas, you're not going to see much unless I draw across an existing line. And if I do something and I don't want to do that, I can use the undo function, Control Z, and that will undo the most recent operations. Let me flip the foreground and background colors again, and notice this little guy here will set the foreground color to black and the background color to white. You have to look carefully because that's a tiny little tool, but you'll get a tooltip that pops up and tells you what it does. Let me show you one other thing that happens when I click and hold the shift key down. Remember, we get straight line segments, but I'm going to continue to hold the shift key down, and notice it remembers that ending point and makes it the starting point for a new line. So if you continue to hold the shift key down, you can draw a continuous collection of straight lines. If I draw a freehand line, and then I press the shift key, it remembers the last point, and I can draw a straight line segment from there. You should take some time just to play around with these different brushes and see how they work. Notice that this line, or this brush, is wide if I go vertical, but narrow if I go horizontal. It's kind of like a calligraphy brush. And a lot of these brushes are similar to that. This is similar except that it has softer edges rather than hard edges. There's so many brushes here to play with, it's hard to stop playing. And notice on any of the brushes that I select, if I want to change the size, I can do that either by typing in a number, doing plus or minus, or I can actually drag the size slider and get smaller peppers. Now notice that not only can I change the size of each brush, I can also change other characteristics. For example, the spacing. If I make the spacing more, make it a lot. Now if I hold and drag, notice that these peppers are spaced a lot farther apart. And this little tool here says resize to the brush's native size, resize to the aspect ratio. All of these things can be reset back to the original native size and hardness and characteristics of the particular selected brush. So spend some time playing around with these brushes. And when you have too much on the canvas, if you want to clean it off, you can do Control A, which selects everything. And now when you press the delete key, whatever is selected is going to be replaced by the current background color. So I press delete. If the background color was something else, okay, and no matter what I have here, let's choose a couple different colors. Well, there's some really strange brushes around. If I select all, Control A, and press delete, whoops, it replaced all of the current selected items with the current background color, which happened to be red. Let me go back and set the foreground and background to the default. And let me select all, Control A, press delete, and get rid of that brush. So you should spend some time playing around with these different settings. After you've done a bunch of scribbling with a lot of the different brushes, try some of the other tools like the pencil tool. The pencil tool will draw with some of the brushes, but with a little bit of different effect. Then there's the airbrush tool. The airbrush tool, together with different colors, foreground, and just kind of gradually shade in depending on the brush you selected. And you notice on the airbrush tool, if you go on top of stuff, it'll act like an airbrush tool. It'll slowly darken it in. And then there's an ink tool. And you notice the ink tool has several shapes. Let's just switch over to another canvas. And here's drawing with the ink tool. Let me switch back to black and white. And there's a square ink tool. And there's a diamond shaped ink tool. And you get different effects. There's one other thing that gives you a big collection. It'll take a lot of time to get through all this. And that's the My Paintbrush tool. If you click on that, you'll get all kinds of things to experiment with. More and more and more. And you can click on them, try it, see what happens, and have a lot of fun. Once you've experimented with the paintbrush tool, then go ahead and try the pencil tool, the airbrush tool, the ink tool, and the My Paintbrush tools. Gives you a lot of stuff to practice with. Next, I'm going to add some text, but I'd like an image to put the text on. So let me go back to the sample image book and choose this clouds image. Right click, copy the image, back to Gimp, Control Shift V to paste the image. And now, following the rule of thumb, I better name this. I don't want it to be untitled. So File, Save As, and I need to choose the folder where it's going to go. And then if this is all highlighted, I can just start typing to replace that. And I'll set either save or enter. Now you can see that I've named this image. And now I want to select the text tool. And in the text tool, I get to select my font. And by the way, remember with the brush tool over here in this brush panel, we could select things there. Well, there's a text panel over here. And I'm going to select Arial Regular. And here I get to choose the size. Maybe I'll start with a 60. See what that's going to look like. And show on canvas editor, anti-aliasing. I think I'll change the color to red for this text trick. Okay. And it's going to be filled. And let me change to justified to center justify. Actually, let me go to left justified. And choose a place over here and start typing. And now if I want to adjust this, I need to select all the letters. So I can either go click, click. I actually went click, click, click. Or I can say Control A to select all of the text. Now, if I change anything, it's going to affect all of the selected text. So I'm going to make this bold, and I'm going to make it a little bigger. Boost it up to about, oh, let's say 72. Well, let's live it up. Let's go all the way up to 80 and see if that will fit. Okay, now I can use the Alt move trick. Alt, drag, and then I can drag this text and eyeball the center. Okay, I've got it bold, I've got it 80, and now that I'm done selecting that, I can just click away. I'm going to click on the move tool, and there's my text. When I do that, it selects the whole batch of text, so I can drag with the move tool. I can drag that text to a new position. Once I have some text in place, I can change the text properties. And not only can I change the properties of the entire selection, but I can select just one character here, and I can change the properties of that. So I'm making a giant T. Oh, let's make it 100. I can even change the color of that character by itself. Okay. And I could even go down here at the other end. And in this case, click, click, I've selected a word. The old Windows selection tricks. Click, select a place, click, click, select a word, click, 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 select a paragraph. Now that I've selected a word, I'm going to change the color of that text to black. And I'll click on the move tool, just click away so you can see what's happening. So it's easy to adjust parts of your text by selecting individual letters or just a part of the text and adjust the text properties for that selection. I think I'd like to make all of this text a little larger, but it's not going to fit here unless I split this into two lines. So I'm going to get back to the text tool, click here, delete that space, press enter. That puts that text on a separate line. I'm going to Control A to select all the text, and then I'm going to select centered. And now I can use my Alt move trick, move this text around, and I have all the text selected. I think I'm going to make this larger now. I think maybe a 144 would work. And then I have to recenter it, so Alt move. And then I'll select the move tool because I'm done moving it around. Now I'd like to add a drop shadow to this text, but although we haven't discussed it so far, we need to talk about layers. When I pasted this clouds image in, it automatically put it on a layer called pasted text. But just to keep track of this, I'm going to double click on that name and I'm going to type clouds. And notice that when you put text in, it automatically puts text on a new layer. As a matter of fact, it names that layer exactly what text is in that layer. So now to do the drop shadow, I need to select the text layer, and then I can go to Filters, Light and Shadow, go to Drop Shadow, and that opens up the Drop Shadow dialog box. And there's something here called Blur Radius. And you notice if you drag that over, you get quite a shadow, quite a fuzzy shadow. And you can also move it till you have no fuzziness at all. And then you might want to move that shadow so that it's right up against there. And there's also an opacity. In this case, I want to have a really dark shadow. doesn't work very well for black on black, does it? Maybe I better back that off a little bit. Okay, and once I'm satisfied, notice that the preview option here is toggled on, so I can actually see what's going on while I'm adjusting the drop shadow settings. Okay, and there it is. Adding a drop shadow is pretty easy as long as you remember that your text is on a different layer and that layer has to be selected before you can operate on it. Next, I'd like to demonstrate the long shadow, but I don't want to mess with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say image, duplicate, and then on the duplicate, I can take this text and I can delete it. So I can delete that layer. And now I'm back to just plain clouds. So I'm going to create new text. And this time I'm going to make the text yellow. And I think I'll start with it about 100. Oh, maybe 144. We'll see how that works. We can always change it. And let's justify it. Come out here and start typing. And type with your fingers on the proper keys. Okay, now I think I'd like to make that bold, but I've got to select it all. Make it bold and do the Alt move trick. And I'll click on the move tool. And now what I'm going to do is notice that that created a new layer that says just the text that I typed, more text. And so now what I want to do is with that layer selected, I'm going to go to filters, light and shadow, long shadow. And I need to change the color of my long shadow. And now get this dialog box out of the way here. And now we can start playing with the shadow. We can change the length and we can change the angle. And we can have shadow plus image or just the shadow or shadow minus image. Well, I'm going to stick with the shadow plus image, opacity. And once again, we can have all kinds of fun messing with the long shadow. If you don't like to have to type the text in manually, there's a way to import text from another document. But before we do that, let's open up another image to work with. So I'm going to go back to the samples book. I'm going to select this tulips picture, right click, copy the image, back to Gimp, and say Control Shift V, and I've pasted a brand new image now. And that image is called pasted layer, but I'm going to double click and I'm going to change that to tulips. Now I want to add a text layer, but if I added text right on top of this busy picture, the text might not stand out from all these flowers. So I'm going to create a box to put my text in. So let me go to select rectangle. I'm going to drag out a rectangle here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have the original colors here. But remember, when I delete something, it's going to take on the background color. So let me delete that box. And now I'm going to go find some text. I'm going to go off to the internet to my Firefox browser. And in the Firefox browser, I went to Wikipedia. And in Wikipedia, I have some text here that I can use. I'm going to drag and collect. I'm going to select that paragraph, and then I'm going to Control C, copy, and then I'll go back to Gimp, and I'm going to go to my text tool, and I'm going to drag a text box, this time almost as big as my white box. And then I'm going to Control V. Text cannot be rendered as likely too big. Make it shorter or use a smaller font. Okay, Z, back up. Can't use 144. Let me try 12. That should be the right size. So now, with my text box here, I'm going to go Control V, and 12 is really too small, but it fits in the box. So let me select all of this text, and let me increase the font. Oops, a little too much, until it fits nicely. And this time I'm going to justify it both left and right. I'm using Arial regular. I think I like bold a little better. And now if I click on move, you can see that I've added this text by importing the text just with a simple copy and paste. I've been able to import this text into a selected box using the text tool. In this next exercise, we're going to fill text with an image. And to do that, we need an image. So we're going to go to our image collection, and we're going to select this tulip picture as our image. Copy that, go back to Gimp, Control Shift V to paste that as our new image. And if we want to rename that, we could do that by double clicking on the layer here. And then we want to right click on that layer, and we want to say add an alpha channel. Then we need to add some text. I'd like to make the text big enough so that some of these tulips will show in that text. So I'm going to set the size to 250, and I'm using Arial Bold. And then I'll click in a place here. And this time I'm going to turn the caps lock key on and add my text. And at this point, if I need to move it around, I can do the Alt drag trick to move it to a new place. Now I need to right click on the text layer, and I need to say alpha to selection. Then I'm going to hide this text layer. See this little eyeball here? Hide the text layer, and I'll right click in the image layer, and I'll say add layer mask, and I'm going to choose the selection option and add that mask, and there you have the words tulips filled with the image. Now I'm going to select none, and I can choose the move tool. Now I can move this around, and you notice that it's masking out. And you notice that as I move this around, the word tulips has become a mask layer, and what will show there will be the part of that original image. And so I can move this until I get enough of these tulips to make it look good. Whenever I have it looking good, actually I can go ahead and export this as a file that I could use later. So I'm going to say File, Export As, and I'm going to call it Tulips1, Export. And I've used this name before in practicing, so I'm going to replace it. And then I'm going to say Export. And so now you can see how we use this tulips image as a background, and then we created the text as a mask, and we can drag that around and move it all over the background, and you can see what part of the tulips image appears in the text. The next challenge is to create curved text, and Gimp allows us to do that. Create text that follows a path. Now the process is a little bit complicated. Here's the steps we're going to follow. First, we'll create some text, then we'll create a path, and then we'll right-click on the text layer and select Text Along Path, and then we'll create a new layer, maybe name the new layer Curved Text, and we'll select the path. Then we're going to right-click on the path and select Fill Paths. Let's see if that actually works. Now we're going to create a new 1920 by 1080 file. Okay, and I'm going to press the minus key to make sure all of that canvas is visible. But I better follow the rule of thumb and go here and rename that. And now I can create some text. I'm going to use Arial Regular and a font size of 130. If that's not the right size, we can always change it after we get the text in place. I'll choose a place here, and I'll type my text. Now I have the text in place. The next thing I need to do is to create a path. So I'll go over to the Paths tool, and I'll start over here on the left side. And here, and click here. And now I can right click on the text layer, and I can select Text Along Path. And there it is. It looks strange so far, but don't worry, we'll clear that up pretty soon. Here on the Layers menu, we're going to create a new layer, and we'll say this is Text on Path. I want to make sure that transparency is selected, and then select OK. So now we have a new layer, Text on Path. Now we're going to go away from the Layers panel, and we're going to select the Paths panel, and go to right click on our path, and we're going to say Fill Paths. And we're going to choose the foreground color, and we'll go ahead and say Fill, and there we are. Now it looks a little strange, but if I click on the Move tool, it gets rid of all those funny little points. Over here in the Paths panel, I'm going to go ahead and say Hide that path. Then I go back to the Layers panel, select my curved text layer, and then up here in the menu bar, I'm going to select Layer, Crop Layers to Content. And there I have my text following a curved path. The next tool we're going to explore is the Bucket Fill tool, but we need an image to work with. So let's go back to the sample image book, and let's choose this big tulip image. Right click, copy, back to Gimp, Control Shift V, and now we have the image. But now we're going to select a part of this image to fill. So we're going to choose the Fuzzy Select tool, and I have anti-alias on, We could feather the edges. Let's try it with and without. And I'll just click in an area here, see what we get. By the way, I have the threshold set at 40. We've got this half. If I hold the shift key down and click over here, I can add to that. I can do shift, click, and click all of those little areas. Now, when I go to the bucket fill tool, I can use foreground, background, or pattern. Let's set the foreground to some other color. Let's try a light blue. Okay. I'll click, and ta-da! We've filled all around that. We don't like the color. We just choose a different color. Okay. And just like that, we can fill with any color we choose. We could have used the background color, or we could use a pattern. I click on pattern, then I go over here and I look at all the available patterns. But if I click on this, it'll give me a name of each pattern. I wish that it would give me the name just by hovering, but I have to click on it to see the name there. Rain. Well, let's see what happens if I fill with rain. There you have it. Bricks. So we can have a lot of fun using the bucket fill tool. I've gone ahead here and I've opened another copy of the same image just to experiment with the different settings. If I go back to the fuzzy select tool, we'll try it first with anti-alias on, feather edges on, select transparent areas, click, and the threshold set to 50 instead of 40, click. Now you notice it's selected a little different areas. It left out some of this, a little up here, a little up there. Let me back up, Control Z, and let me turn off feathered edges. Click. We got a lot of better selection this time. There's all kinds of experimenting we can do. Control Z, select transparent edges off, click. Got about the same result. I don't know if you notice, there's a little area in here that it did not pick up. Control Z, put this transparent areas back on, click, and I'll go click. And this time, I only got this half. Control Z, this time I'm going to click here. Got a different selection. That's left out, that's left out. Control Z. Because of the subtle shading here, each different selection comes out a little differently. If I click right in that, so you can play around until you get exactly the kind of shading you want. Let's turn this transparent edges off. Let's turn anti-aliasing off, leaving the threshold at 50. Again, this time we got half. Over here, we got less than half. This area was a lot more uniform dark. This was not so much. Control Z. If I click down here in this dark area, once again, I'm getting different results. Click over here, different results. So there's a lot of variation depending on the different options that are selected. If I do sample merge, click. Oh, not a lot of difference there. Click. Not much difference there. Click that off. Diagonal neighbors. Click. A little different each time. Control Z. Click. Control Z. So I think I'm going to go back to the anti-aliasing on. Turn this one off. And I get that result. Control Z. And feathered edges on. Click. Once again, a different result. Control Z, click, different result. Feathered edges off, select transparent areas on, click, shift, click, click. Took me 3 shift clicks to get all of this stuff selected out. Now when I go back to the bucket fill, remember we were doing pattern fill before? Let's try some variations here. Marble, don't like it. Control Z. Chocolate swirl, I don't like it. Control Z. Oh, you can have all kinds of fun here. Sky. I wish there was a way to change that sky so it was a bigger scale and didn't repeat so often. Control Z. Wood of some sort. Mystery wood. Control Z. Wood number 2. Control Z. Wood number 1. Control Z. Wood. Control Z. Well, we could go through all day having fun with these different fill patterns. And eventually, you'll find a fill that you might prefer. Created a new image that's 1920 by 1080 that shows right up here. And I'm going to use this image to experiment with the gradient fill. And this gradient fill tool gives us a lot of options. There are so many options it can take you half a day to go through them all. We're going to start with a normal and opacity 100%. Now here's where we can choose the different fills, but just like the paintbrush and the pattern files, we have a gradient fill option over here. And if I select this, and then I just use my down arrow key, I can go through all of these different gradient fill options. Pick one, and then I can use a radial shape or I can use a linear shape. Let's start with a linear shape or square, conical, blah, blah, blah. Lots of variations here. The way this gradient fill works, on the linear shape, I'm just going to click someplace and I'm going to draw a line, and you see how it's going from one color to the other color in the blue-green. It's going from, well, it actually goes green to blue, but it's called blue-green. It is possible to reverse that. Reverse it without me changing anything. I can just reverse the pattern right here. And I can just draw a new line, and I can Control Z out of that. I can draw a new line. You can make rainbows. You can do all kinds of things with this gradient. Let's choose a radial instead of the linear. Let me Control Z. And with the radial, if I start in the middle and go outward, see I'm going from blue to green. Again, I could reverse that and go from green to blue. Well, that's using the blue-green color. And remember, there's a whole long list of different preset gradient. And you can just go through that and compare them one by the other. We're still doing the same radial motion there with our gradient dragger, but you can see all the different things that can happen. Wow, there's so many combinations. It'll drive you crazy playing with all of these. Let's do tropical colors, and let's switch from radial back to linear. And I can drag this around. Notice all these little places in the middle, all those grip points. I can grab one of these grip points and just shift that area of it by changing the grip point. A little more green, a little more green. Stretch this out more, move it around, and go from, by the way, I'm now, as soon as I change that, I'm no longer on that pre-select, I'm on a custom radial fill. And just compare the different fills. Have so much fun with this. You'll waste the whole evening away. Okay, you can spend some time experimenting with this. I'm going to go back to the radial and I'm going to go back to foreground background color and I'm going to take a look at this little dialog box up here. Here I can set the color for the starting point and the ending point. And I can control the X and Y position of that. So I can either drag it around, very subtle there, or I can drag it with the mouse like this, and so on. Let's go back up here to the list of gradient fills, and let's just plain foreground to background color. And let me make the foreground color white. And let me make the background color blue. Some kind of blue. Okay. Now that I have that set, I'm going to go back to my tulip. And I'm going to go click and drag. And I can put a gradient fill in that selected area, the fuzzy selected area of the tulip. Lots of fun with gradient fills. In this session, we're going to talk about layers. And layers are extremely important in Gimp, and I've been avoiding the topic up until now. But this time we're going to focus on layers and see how things work. The layers weren't so important when we were taking existing images and just modifying them or enhancing them. Now that we're going to be creating new images, layers are important to consider. We'll start by creating a new 1920 by 1080 image. And I'm going to zoom out so that I can see the whole canvas. And when we created that new image, it put it on a layer called background. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click on that background layer and we're going to add an alpha channel. And once we add an alpha channel, every new thing that we create is going to automatically include an alpha channel. And that relates to things being transparent. Now we're going to add a little bit of text. And this time I'm going to select Times New Roman Regular as my font. And then I'll just click someplace here and I'm going to type Tulip Time. I'm going to select all of that. I'm going to make it bold. And I'm also going to make the color red. And I think I'll make it a little bigger than this. I can always change it later, but that's what I have for now. I'm going to click on move, and I'm going to move this text. Oops. Notice what happened. I clicked on move, but the background layer was selected instead of the text layer. If I click on the text layer, I'll be moving that layer. It's very important now, when we start working on things, to pay attention to what layer is currently selected before you do an operation. Look carefully at the layers panel now. You'll see that there's this little eyeball on each layer. That means you can see it or not see it. There's also a tool to lock the layer, and there's also something for special effects on layers. For now, we'll add another layer, but this time we're going to go to our sample book locate windmill row, right click it, copy it, go back to Gimp, but now we're just not going to paste it as a new image. We're going to go to Edit, Paste as a single layer. And if I go ahead and move that so you can see the other part, notice that when we pasted the image as a new layer, it adds the layer to the list. The default name for the new layer is pasted layer. In order to organize these things, I don't want to have a lot of layers all named the same, and we're going to be pasting some more layers. So let me rename this layer as windmill row. And now that I have this windmill row layer, I'm going to scale it. I think this is a little big for my purposes. So I'm going to choose the scale tool. I can drag that smaller. I'm watching up here in the scale dialog box. I'd like this to be about 600 pixels wide. It's kind of close. And if I just type in 600 there and press tab, it'll reset that. When I've got the new scale that I want, I'm going to click on scale. By the way, the scale tool allows me to shrink things within the existing canvas. It also allows me to enlarge things within the existing canvas. If I enlarge the scale of this to be outside of the canvas, well, let's just try it and see what happens. Basically, what will happen is the only thing I'm going to be left with is what's inside the canvas. And so you have to be careful. This has the effect of cropping that image, and I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back and just enter in my 600, and then I'm going to finalize the scale. And now I can move, whoops, still have the scale tool selected. And now if I choose move, I can go ahead and move this windmill row image any place I like. Now I can arrange these layers any way I like. I'm going to choose the move tool and have the windmill row layer selected. And I'm going to drop that down here close to the lower right corner. And now I want to drag this tulip time text around. So let me select that. Just to be dramatic, let me turn off the background and turn off the windmill row. And now I'm selecting tulip time text, and I can move that around independently of those other layers. I'm going to turn them back on. And with that text layer selected, I'm going to go to filters, light and shadow, and I'm going to enter a long shadow, and I can move that around. What I'd like to do is I'd like to make that 30 degrees. I can adjust the length of the shadow. And right now I have shadow plus image. I can adjust the opacity of the shadow. And when I'm happy with my shadow, I can like it a little darker. When I'm happy with my long shadow, I'll say OK. And just to be different, I'm going to select the windmill row image, and I'm going to choose filters, light and shadow, and just do a drop shadow. And you can see what's happening here. I have a very light drop shadow, so I'll increase the opacity of that. And I can have a grow radius. And I'm going to choose the size. There's all kinds of things I can do now with a drop shadow. I think I'd like this windmill row layer to be rotated some. So make sure I have that selected and go up here to the rotate tool. And can I just rotate it like this? Yes, I can rotate it this way. I can rotate it that way, but that puts it out of the edge of the canvas. So once I've rotated it, then I'll do the move tool and I'll move it back in so it fits in the canvas a little better. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my sample image book, and I'm going to add some clouds for the upper half of this image. Select the clouds, copy it, back to Gimp, edit, paste, paste as, single layer, and there's my clouds. It's called pasted layer. So let me double click and call that layer clouds. As you can see, if you don't do this, you'll end up with a whole bunch of pasted layers. You won't know who's who. Okay, I have the move tool selected right now. I can move the clouds around. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have the clouds fit all the way across the canvas. That calls for the scale tool. And I don't want to keep the aspect ratio. I don't want to scale it around the center. I just want to be able to drag this over this way, drag this over this way, and I think I not have quite as much vertically. And I have to tell it that I'm done scaling, or it won't remember that. One more thing to add, back to the sample image book, and this time I'm going to select the tulip garden, copy it, back to Gimp, edit, paste as a single layer. I'm going to rename that to Tulip Garden. And I'm going to move this one to the bottom half of the picture. And again, I'm going to scale. So I'm going to scale it to the bottom part of the picture, make it as wide as the canvas. And when I'm happy with that, I'll finish the scaling. Now let's move these things around. I would like to have the tulip time text to be in front. So what I do is I'll just either drag it in front here or I'll move it up and down. And next I'll put my windmill row a little higher in the order. I want it to be in front of the tulip gardens and in front of the clouds. That big tulip picture that we had a while back, I'm going to revisit that. I'm going to go to the sample book, find the big tulip, copy it, and back in Gimp, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste that as a new image. And I want to make sure that I've modified this. Remember, we used the fuzzy select. I'm trying to isolate just the tulip itself. And now that I have just the tulip without any background selected, I'm going to copy that, Control C. I'm going to go back to my other picture, and I'm going to say Edit, Paste as a single layer, and and right now I've selected all of the outline. Remember, you can fill this. I want to do the opposite. I don't want any of this outline. I only want the tulip. That means I have to go to Select, Invert. Now, instead of selecting all of this background, I've inverted that. Now I've just selected the tulip itself. So let me copy that, Control C, go back into my composite thing here, and now I'm going to say Edit, Paste as, a single layer, and there's my big tulip. Let's move it around. Too big, so let's scale it. This time I'm going to keep the aspect ratio. going to get it over here, and then I'm going to move it a little bit so that I have this as part of my big picture. Wait a minute, I have a pasted layer copy and I didn't rename that, so I better go rename that. I'll call it Big Tulip. And if I want to have some fun, I could rotate that a little bit. And I could say filter, light and shadow, drop shadow, and darken up the drop shadow some. And I'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and there's no end of playing that you can do, but you see, by using layers, how you can assemble a bunch of images, individually work on the image, whether it's shadows or whether it's scaling, and you can rearrange the image one thing after the other. If you've assembled all of this, you might not be happy with some of the effects you've applied. Well, here's the good news. Remember, you can turn these on and off, but now on some of these layers, there's this FX, special effects type. I'm on with the tulip time layer selected. If I click on the FX, I see this long shadow. I double click on that, and here comes my dialog box for the long shadow. And so I can go back here and I can actually edit that long shadow and make the changes. Oops. Now this is getting too much fun. Let me sweep it that way and make it a little shorter. And say, okay. The point is that with Gimp 3, after you've installed something into a layer, you can go in and adjust the effects that you've applied to that layer. By now, especially if you've been following along in the book, look how far you've come. All the way from just using sample images, correcting, enhancing the images, making your new drawings, all the way up to editing effects. If you're a good student, you're going to clear everything out and you're going to go back to the very beginning and you're going to go through all the steps and all the lessons again. Or you could go to the table of contents and just repeat the sections that you want to review. But you really need to put some time into this. After all, if you were learning to play the piano, you would practice playing the same song many times to improve your skills. The same principle applies to learning to use computer software. You can't go through one piano lesson and expect to play Chopin without going back and practicing and practicing. The same thing is true when you're using Gimp. You can't expect to go through all of this once unless you have a photographic memory and remember everything that we've covered here. So if you're a good student, you'll go back and you'll review some of these sections and some of these lessons. If you're a good student, you'll go back and repeat these skills, practice until you really have them under control, and you'll become a real Gimp power user.